I'm Paul Van Squike, your Taekwondo guide, and this is Topic Tuesday. If you're new to Topic Tuesday, the concept is quite simple. People send me questions, and we talk about them. It's just me talking to a camera, so I always say, pop your headphones in and get some stuff done around the house. Don't let entropy win the battle. Take charge, maintain your property while you listen to this great conversation about Taekwondo and often other martial arts as well. Let's dive in. I have a comment that I thought I'd just read because I thought it was a very good comment. It's not a question, but I thought it was a very good comment from Terminal Monk, who writes, "One very important idea in Taekwondo is being a good representative. You do not solely represent yourself, you also represent everyone that has helped you to grow as a person and martial artist. This is to include your instructors, your parents, and even your country." Couldn't agree more. Terminal Monk, thank you for that great comment. I think it mirrors a biblical concept, and I'm no theologian, but this is interesting to me because I think, at least my understanding of it, is that it's often misinterpreted. You have honor thy father and mother, and you have do not take the Lord's name in vain. The first one people often think as sort of blind obedience to a parental figure, but my understanding of this reading is that it's rather talking about your behavior and how it reflects on your family name. So to honor thy father and mother would be to take on the proper behavior, to give to society in a way that honors the name that you carry. And the same is true for do not take the Lord's name in vain. Many interpret this as sort of saying something like, "Oh God," right, instead of "oh goodness." When in fact my understanding of the reading is again that if you take on the name of being a Christian, for example, that you are then expected to uphold the teachings because you carry that name. You represent yourself as a Christian, and therefore the weight of your actions represent God's name, right? So do not take the Lord's name as in, I follow God in vain, but my behavior does not reflect it. And I think this is a concept that carries over to the martial arts. In fact, I put it on my wall. I created what we call a leadership pledge. And number 4 says, I will uphold the honor of my academy and the legacy of my instructors through my actions. Again, mirroring this concept, because I think that is quite important. So thank you, Terminal Monk. From Bandit Boyman 7. Does watching Bruce Lee and imitating his kicks help me in Taekwondo sparring matches? That's a good question. First of all, how many of you have watched Bruce Lee movies and then tried to mimic his kicks in Taekwondo sparring matches? I certainly have done that myself. Now, is it of value from the standpoint of copying his techniques? Not necessarily. I don't think that's where the value lies. I think what Bruce Lee provides for many of us is the archetype, the idea of a warrior. He represents a deeper concept, this eternal concept of a warrior, and he's one of the most prominent figures in the modern world for what a warrior represents. So we take on this image, we try to embody this image, and we think of him, we look to him as the example that we're striving to attain, the example we're shooting for, we're aiming at. So I think from an inspiration standpoint, from that standpoint, it can be quite valuable to watch something like a Bruce Lee movie and try to mimic that archetype, that will help your performance. But that's more of a psychology thing than he chambered his knee at this angle, and that's what will win the fight. I'll chamber my kick just like he did, and that will help me in sparring. Not to say that there's none of that. Certainly, Bruce Lee was technically quite proficient, and you might glean some insights from his technical understanding. But I think the broader perspective here, the more important part of getting help from someone like Bruce Lee is the psychological component, mirroring the archetype, right? All right, from JV Kanufan 8115. Hi, Paul. My question is this. I believe Taekwondo is generally considered a hard style, direct and linear. I'm interested in exploring what Taekwondo offers in softness as I'm older and less of a gladiator nowadays. Do you have recommendations for ways to emphasize any softer aspects of Taekwondo, evasion, circularity, flowing around the opponent? Hope that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. It's interesting that we break the martial arts into categories that we call hard and soft. Often I find that what's referred to as a hard style is often a striking style, whereas what's referred to as a soft style is typically more of a grappling style. So let's just look at some examples. We often think of karate, taekwondo, muay thai, these sorts of striking arts as hard styles. We often think of aikido, judo, tai chi, jiu-jitsu as soft styles. You can see in both of these examples, we tend to think of the arts like karate and taekwondo as striking, and we tend to think of these other arts as grappling. And if you didn't know, yes, Tai Chi is very grappling heavy. It almost resembles wrestling. So, first let's examine if those categories really hold up when we put them under a microscope, because my contention is that at a high level, every martial art will appear to be soft and effortless. That is the marker of an expert. When someone does something at such a high level that it looks effortless, that's when you know they're a true master of their craft. So yes, Taekwondo Pumse, for example, has a lot of linear movement in that you take a straight line to your path. But where's the soft part? Where's the circles? It's there. It's just sort of hidden. And again, if you watch a world-class Pumse champion, they make it look completely effortless. You don't even necessarily detect these elements, but it's there. And by the way, the taegok, the word taegok, refers to this duality, hard and soft. And so you could say that when you perform the taegok patterns, for example, you're supposed to embody hard and soft, slow and fast. So we understand that at the end of a strike, you need to tense your body, at least momentarily, so that there's some structure to deliver your weight through. You can't just be loosey-goosey and hit something because there's no structure on impact. You end up hurting yourself, right? But everything that happens in that transition can be said to be soft and circular. So when you stage your hands for a low block, for aremaki, and you wind up your hips, what are you doing? You're creating a circle internally inside of your body. That motion is soft. Often it's slower as well. So it's slow and soft to extension, which is done fast, right? Slow to fast, soft to hard, hard at the end of the motion. So in Taekwondo Pumse, you're exploring this duality between hard and soft at all times. If you're hard the whole time, it's not good Pumse. Likewise, if you're floppy at the end of your technique, it's just completely soft, then that is also no longer good Pumse. You have to have both elements working together. And if you want to see the circles, look no farther than the hips, the hip movements, what's happening internally in the body. And of course, even the punch, which we think of as linear, the punch uses a spiral to get to the target. So here, even though it's a straight line, we still see a circle. And all of the blocks have a circular characteristic to them, right? So if you watch the arc of most of the movements, possibly all of the movements, I would have to stop and think of that, they embody a circle in some form or another. Now, it's not as pronounced as something perhaps like Aikido or Tai Chi, but it's certainly there. Now, from a fighting perspective, the highest level fighters have developed their fighting intuition to such a high level that you see circles and softness all the time. In fact, just last night, I had the pleasure of watching one of my higher-ranking, smaller female students doing a drill with a larger, more powerful student, male versus female, but less experienced. The drill was where one person is placed in the corner of a ring, and the other is trying to drive them out, usually with side kicks, back kicks, linear kicks that work to push them out of a given area. So the person in the corner was working on canceling the attacks of the offensive role player and trying not to give their ground. Now, if someone throws a side kick at you and you just brace your body, you're going to take the brunt of that kick. And you'll probably either move backwards or you're going to hurt internally because you absorb all of that force as you're tense. What she was doing, and this is again what you'll see high-level fighters do all the time, was she was rolling with the kicks. So if she didn't have her own leg in the way to cancel it, when a side kick would come toward her to hit her, she'd let it slide off of her body, lean back a little bit and let it glance. This quality allowed her to hold her ground, to not get injured, and to frustrate this more powerful, less experienced opponent. And it was fun to watch because it's a testament to exactly what you're talking about, to yielding and the effectiveness of yielding in a fight context. Certainly you see this with high-level boxers all the time. Someone goes to hit them and they're simply not there, or they let the punch roll off of their guarded position. They then circle back and hit with their own strike. So even though we're talking about striking arts, when it comes to defense, the circles are there all the time. You can practice drills like the one I'm talking about to develop that intuition. Force yourself to hold your ground in one area so you know you're going to be dealing with receiving the strike. And then you can work on moving your bodies in ways that dissipate the strike rather than internalizing the impact. Now, in grappling arts, this is especially evident because you have the concept of push-pull. If they're pushing, you pull. If they're pulling, you push, right? So you're blending with their actions. The same is basically true with striking. It's just a difference in distance and timing. So I think let me rephrase that. I think every martial art at its highest level becomes a softer art. I think that striking can function more easily than grappling as a purely hard system. And what I mean by that is you can be extremely rigid and tight and just be a good athlete and hurt someone by striking them. If you're extremely rigid and tight, you can probably still be a pretty decent, I don't want to say decent, you can still grapple against a lot of people if you're a good athlete and just overpower them. But at the highest level, you have to accept the concept of yielding. You have to make that part of your repertoire because you need that as an element in the toolbox to be a complete player in any of those particular arts, or a fighter, whatever term you want to use, for someone at their highest level who's doing some form of combat. You know, I was just playing with the exercise, which is also a form of competition in Tai Chi, called push hands. It's a really fun exercise, actually. I think you could benefit from it whether you do Tai Chi or not. So there's a few ways you can practice it. One that's really fun is you just plant your feet in one spot. Your partner plants their feet in one spot, and you're pushing and yielding on each other and trying to get the other person to move their feet without you moving yours. What I like about it is very low impact, but it allows you to build a great connected sense of where their center is and learn to do that type of yielding and pushing with your partner in a way that you can just repeat because it's very low impact. You can add more dynamic training to that by allowing for movement in your feet, and then the goal becomes either trying to take them out of a given space, kind of like sumo, or disrupt them in a more tangible way where they're sort of visibly taken out of balance, or even throwing them down. Those are sort of the ways that you would win in a mobile Tai Chi push hands contest. You can actually look up videos of Tai Chi push hand competitions. They're really interesting. So I don't think, though, that the exercise needs to be exclusive to Tai Chi. I think any martial artist can easily play those games with each other and build a better sense of connectivity and learn how to yield under those conditions. So even though you're a Taekwondo practitioner, there's no reason you can't do an exercise like that. I think it's only going to help build your bodily awareness and intuition. So that's a really cool question. From Daryl, 2023. Thanks for the reply, sir. Would you like to discuss ring facts for the next episode? Not the ones the wives want, but the ring facts for tournaments. What is the set size dimensions for most? Are the foam mats a set standard, or is it legally okay to not use them for competition? Well, on the same topic, are the latest foot protectors adapting well for non-slip on them? Do you recommend any brands? What is the best cleaning solution for use on the mats in the dojo? How do they not move on gym floors when in use for just the weekend? Where were they developed by Kukkiwan staff, KTA, or someone else? And for beginners, what is the point scale for deduction or warnings given for stepping in the red during competition, whether it be pumse or sparring usually? Well, these are a lot of specific questions about mats. So let me be the first to tell you, I am not so heavily involved in the sport world that I have these numbers ready in my head that legal mat size is this many by this many feet, and it must be this exact material and this thickness. And those numbers, of course, are out there and easy to look up. I don't have them in my head. I did not look them up. I don't really want to take the conversation that way. That's a lot of sort of sport legalism, which some people might find of interest, but that's not really what my channel is about here. So let's take it a different direction. Let's talk about how the use of sparring rings sort of crafted what is modern sport Taekwondo, because they really had a big impact on what the game looks like. So in the case of boxing rings, you have a confined space that you cannot exit outside of being thrown over the ropes, right? A cage, it's even more pronounced. You're stuck in this zone. And when you're stuck in a very specific zone, you have to develop a lot of ways to hold your ground, to block. So you'll get something that looks more like kickboxing, like Muay Thai, where fighters learn to use these shells to absorb the shots, to not give ground. In the case of a floor ring, where you could step off, and where they're generally giving you more space to operate in, your movement becomes a bigger part of the game. When you're faced with getting hit with a powerful kick, And your options are block or move out of the way. If you have the room to move out of the way, and if the consequences of moving out of the way are low, then moving out of the way is most of the time going to be your preferred option. And so what happened is, because we have these wide open rings with no strict boundaries, when someone would tee off with a hard kick on a competitor, their response would be to move away so that the kick would miss them, rather than stand in that pocket and have an exchange of blocks and kicks. You get less banged up, right? So this forced the offensive side of Taekwondo to focus more on speed and movement rather than bone-crushing power. And that is not to say that fast, mobile kicks don't hurt. They can have their own explosive qualities. They're very powerful in their own right, but it's different from planting yourself and kicking, right? Most of the competitive Taekwondo kicks involve some sort of slide or hopping action so that you can catch your opponent, who is more than likely going to retreat in some form or another. This is especially apparent in what is now called old school Taekwondo sparring. There's a lot of dodging and counter kicking. I would say fighters nowadays are more likely to plant than they were before because of the adaptation and rules, but certainly in the early days of sport Taekwondo, this dynamic of moving out of the way and counter kicking greatly shaped the aesthetic of the sport and the way the game was played. Further, the consequences for moving out of the ring aren't that great. Currently, you give your partner 1 point, and the only technique that scores 1 point is a punch. In other words, if you kick them with something, you could score 2 points, 3 points, 4 points, 5 points, depending on the way that it hits your opponent. So the consequences for moving out of the ring are pretty minimal, meaning that if your choice is, I'm going to get kicked really hard, or I can just step off the mat and take the penalty, you probably choose to step off the mat. And if I'm not mistaken, you know, the Taekwondo rules change every other week. It's hard to remember what they were, much less what they are now. But my memory is that if you stepped off the mat in the old days, you were simply warned. If you did it a handful of times, then you received the deduction point. So I don't remember the exact number of times, if that was a specific number, if it was the ref's call, but point being that the penalty for stepping off was pretty low. And so again, that contributes to a more movement-based sport. So the mat and the ring has really shaped the evolution of sport Taekwondo because of the way it forces fighters to engage in movement-based kicking. Well, that is really an interesting concept to me. You know, types of mats, measurements, all that stuff. You can look into that if you're interested. I'm not going to get into that here. Again, a lot of those things I don't hold in my head anyway. I do clean my mats pretty much every single day. And so I will tell you that I destroyed some mats cleaning with Pine Sol, so I wouldn't do that. I tend to use Dawn dish soap because it's known for being a mild cleaning solution, because I want to protect and preserve my mats as best I can. So those of you who clean your mats, I do want to harp on that point. Don't use Pine Sol, because it, at least in my case, caused them to deteriorate. Okay, thank you, Daryl. From Matthew Berman 2541. You mentioned going on a carnivore diet to lose weight for a brief period of time. You didn't find that impacted explosiveness at all. Any interesting side effects observed during that time? Well, about a year ago, actually, I did go on a carnivore diet for about 2 months. It was not to lose weight. However, weight loss is absolutely a byproduct of the carnivore diet if you are looking to lose weight, I know, at least from my experience, that it works. I don't have a lot of weight to lose, but what I had to lose fell off of me in the course of about 2 weeks using the carnivore diet. The reason I went on the carnivore diet is because I heard a variety of people say that it's really good for inflammation. If you suffer from arthritis, which I do, I have arthritis in my right hip, that it can alleviate that pain, even restore full function. And what I found is, one, it does reduce the pain. For me, maybe 10 to 20%, depending on the day. So there was definitely some pain reduction involved. I went off of the diet because it plateaued at around 10 to 20%. And for me, food is one of the greatest pleasures in life. And so being on a very strict diet like that was sucking all of the fun out of my existence, if you will. Now, if it had given me 50%, 60% relief, if it had cured me, maybe then it would be worthwhile. But the bit of pain that it took off was not enough to change my lifestyle in any meaningful way. So, yes, it took the edge off, but it didn't allow me to jump back into sparring without any repercussions, right? It didn't change how I could train. So there wasn't enough value for me to personally continue it. Again, I watched, so when I went on it, one of my relatives was inspired to try it as well for weight loss, and it worked tremendously well for them in that regard. So it definitely has some value for weight loss. Now, in terms of impacting explosiveness, I didn't notice any performance issues when on the carnivore diet. I probably felt possibly as good as any time in my life in terms of just general cardiovascular health, that kind of thing. I do think it's really good for just taking the inflammation out of the body, so that could possibly be experienced in the lungs and so forth as well if you have sensitivity to other foods. There's something to it. I don't know exactly how it all works, and I don't know if sustaining it long term is a good idea or not, but there's something to it. So that was my experience. But I didn't use it for weight loss specifically. I used it for inflammation. That's the point I wanted to harp on there. Well, thank you everyone for your comments making this a great Topic Tuesday. You know how it works. If you want another Topic Tuesday, we need questions, we need comments. So please get down in the questions and comments section and type away so that we can have another excellent Topic Tuesday next week. Thank you very much for joining me, and until next time, enjoy your training.